First of all, thank you, Constantino, for the extremely generous words. Good evening again. And we are talking about connectivity here, which is such a ubiquitous term that is sometimes very difficult to pin down its contours. And we are trying to take a stock of its direction right now in South Asia because we have been, after Prime Minister Modi took over, Neighbourhood First has been a buzzword that we have been hearing again and again. So, and that has raised expectations of what India can deliver and whether it has done so. We have a very distinguished panel here who will help us to understand this subject. So I'll just start with a quick introduction with, to my extreme right is Dr. Rohan Samarajiva, founding chair of Lin Asia, an ICT policy and regulation think tank active across Asia. He is a member of the UN Global Pulse Advisory Group on the Governance of Data and Artificial Intelligence. And in 2018-19, Dr. Samarajiva served as chair of the ICT agency, the apex body for information and communication technology within the government of Sri Lanka. To my right is Ambassador Tariq Karim, who's a very well-known face in New Delhi, having been Bangladesh's High Commissioner to India for over 5 years until October 2014. Since then, he has been advising the World Bank on the South Asian Regional Integration Program. Besides being High Commissioner in India, he has also served as Bangladesh's envoy to US, South Africa and Iran. To my left is Dr. Swarnim Bagle, who is chairman of Institute for Integrated Development Studies, Kathmandu. He has also served on the National Planning Commission of Nepal for 3 years between 2014 and 2018. First as member and then first as member for 3 years. 2.5 years, and then as vice chair. After that is basically Dr. Anuswar Vasu Rai Chaudhary, senior fellow with Observer Research Foundation's Neighbourhood Initiative. She is based in Calcutta, specializing in South Asia, energy, politics, forced migration, and women in conflict zones. And of course, we know Dr. Xavier there, who, if I may say so, has been a key person in Delhi, has been instrumental in promoting more in-depth and innovative research on India's engagement in South Asia. I think we should start first with initial remarks from each of the panelists. Basically, gentlemen, if I can ask you to speak on how you look at connectivity from the perspective of your countries. What are the priorities, and is there a difference in how connectivity is looked at from New Delhi's perspective, it being basically rather more India-centric? And do you look at connectivity not just as basically linkages with India, but as beyond South Asia? So let's start with Dr. Rohan.
Yeah, thank you. Those days I used to do when I was a regulator, I used to do rough calculations, which is, multiply something by 50. Oh, that's the Indian number, whatever we had, 50 times, right? So you get a sense of the scale problem, right? So when I looked at the problem, I've been working on connectivity for a long time, telecom as well as other kinds of connectivity. So one of the key areas in connectivity is that we need a framework. I mean, we can just go on describing, but what is the framework? So what Tino had presented was Shyam Saran's dense interdependency. But Saran himself presents the dense interdependency argument, which we all know. I mean, this was to stop the French from killing the Germans and, that whole European iron and steel community kind of logic, right? But then he says, but our neighbors are not always enthusiastic about it. So the question then arises, what is this lack of enthusiasm? And maybe you can't see it from here, but I can see it from Colombo much better than you can. Because I'm the kind of guy who gets his name put up on various posters and PowerPoint slides and say straight up. Because I argue for connectivity with India, for trade agreements with India, and so on and so forth. So the issue there is with this asymmetry, what you get is people saying, what if they shut it down? So the question you could imagine is, I would say 70-80% of Bhutan's export revenue, government finances, everything comes from the export of electricity, right? So just imagine for the moment that you cut off that relationship for a few weeks. Are the impacts on Bhutan the same as so Bhutan doesn't get the money, you guys don't get the electricity. But in India, brownouts, blackouts, load shedding, you can do without Bhutanese electricity, I think, for a little while, right? But can they? So there is that asymmetry issue. So there's a whole series of these things. So one of the issues that I have been really pushing hard, and I published on and so on, is the DC cable connecting the Indian grid and the Sri Lankan grid for a lot of reasons. We can bring more renewables in, we can deal with our valley at night, the minimum requirement for the coal plants. There's a whole series of reasons why we should do this. But people are worried that, what if the Indians shut it down? They tell me, oh, you go to India all the time, your friends, but see what they did to Nepal. Now, you can argue with me. My Indian colleagues have been sending me emails and letters and articles that Nepal was not a blockade. But the whole world thinks it was a blockade. Okay? So, perception is reality in this business. Perception is that there was a blockade on Nepal. So they're saying, what if there's a blockade? So I say, hey, guys, we're not buying electricity from them. We are just giving them electricity when we have too much electricity. And when one of our plants shuts down, we're going to get some. So it's going to be better than what we have, but we are not dependent on Indian electricity, like the kind of dependence that Bhutan that Bhutan has on the Indian market. Still a hard road, very hard road, right? Because so the model that I think is more feasible is the port. We have, depending on the year, the largest or the second largest Indian container port sitting in Colombo. I didn't misspeak. First or second largest Indian container port is in Colombo, right? So 70-80% of the boxes that go through are Indian. They are either going to or coming from India, right? So if you buy volume, sometimes it's higher than the Nehru port in near Mumbai. Now there the question is, I think we'll be hurt. Both sides will be hurt if something is done to the port. We will be definitely hurt, but India will also be hurt. So I think the hurt issue will be symmetrical. So we need to look at models like that, and we need to also build trust for even the models that are less symmetrical. Right. So that's, I think, the key point. Is it enough, or you want more? That should be incendiary enough. I would suggest, for example, that we don't use the word reconnecting. I'll conclude with this point. That reconnecting word. I can remember I gave a talk on, I think, one of the BIMSTEC lectures in Thailand, and I was talking about reconnecting the Bay of Bengal and things like that. So there were some issues with that word. But here there's a real issue. The real issue is that in historical memory, there was an enormous amount of movement of people in this region, across the Bay of Bengal, which all stopped in 1947-48, right? Number 18, Act number 18 of 1948 of Sri Lanka was the Citizenship Act, which created stateless people, right? One of the first things that we did as soon as we got independence in Sri Lanka, I'm not being proud of it, right? I'm just stating a fact, was to take away the citizenship of a large number of people, make them stateless, right? 8 MPs were sitting in parliament representing those people. They all became disenfranchised, right? So why did this happen? What did Myanmar do? Yangon was a majority Indian city. You know what happened? How Yangon became a majority Myanmar city. People walked from Yangon to India and they died on the way. This was one of the great tragedies of our time, right? So, except for Thailand, all the other countries had to deal with this phenomenon. Malaysia and Singapore did it better. Myanmar and Sri Lanka did it very badly, right? Thailand, because it was not part of the British Empire, didn't have this issue. So if you start talking reconnecting, historical memory will bring that up. And that is a real fear factor, real. Right? Mode 4 in services trade is almost untouchable. Right? I am one of the few people who talks about Mode 4 and I get pilloried for that. So,
Ambassador, could you tell us what you think?
Well, I mean, I'm largely in agreement with many things that you have said. I'm also looking from outside in India, and I resonate with many of the points that you made. I don't have so much of a problem with that reconnecting thing. It's maybe I would say reviving it, or rediscovering, or reinventing it, or redefining it. This was arguably the most integrated region of the world for several millennia. And then 47, overnight, it became the least integrated. Why did this happen, and why does it continue showing signs of resisting anything which is trying to reconnect you? It's all, in a sense, I mean, we've been talking politics and how to improve trade, how to increase trade. We've been talking about the abysmal intra-SAARC trade. Yes, it increased 100% from 1985 to 2005. But that's from 2.5% of the global trade to 5%. So that 100% is really meaningless. Okay. Why is that happening? And I see that it's not politics, politics, politics. It's the political divisions created, and once you have created the divisions, the efforts by every regime that inherited that divided space was to deepen the chasm, broaden the divide. And it continues that way. I think, in a sense, I'm beginning to wonder whether that is the whole intention of South Asia even today. Do we have to fight another World War to make the people realize that we have to stop, never again? And I'll make some quick comments on this paper, excellent paper, which presentation that Tino presented. Number one, I think on table one date is wrong. We should fix that. The 2009 India-Bangladesh Framework Agreement, it was actually signed and announced on 6th September 2011 during Dr. Manmohan Singh's visit. So that puts it, because otherwise many other things would not have happened. That framework document, in a sense, in my mind, is perhaps the most remarkable document creating the grounds for regional cooperation and region rediscovering itself as a region. It's yet to happen, but that actually led to sub-regional cooperation. The efforts being made to go forward. There have been 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, sometimes 1 step forward, 2 steps backward, but it is still going, mercifully. You say this strengthening of cross-border relations has been significant and unprecedented. I would say it's been phenomenal. If you consider what was not there for 60 years, what happened within this span of 10 years was indeed phenomenal. Okay. Why did that happen? I come back to the politics. There was a meeting of political minds, there was a sharing of vision, and there was a will to do certain things and take them forward. As long as that kept manifesting, we were able to do things. I mean, the land boundary agreement, India's largest border that it inherited after 1947, 3, China, Pakistan, East Pakistan, later Bangladesh. The largest was with Bangladesh, 4,000,
69.
96.
16.
68.
Bengali discussion.
And
Spontaneously.
yeah, and
1 kilometer difference.
and it was resolved without any third-party mediation, just amicably making, it was a package deal. Maritime boundary was resolved, and once you have good fences, you can work towards being good neighbors. Okay, that's a principal point. So, in a sense, between China and Pakistan, there are qualitative differences, but that's not the subject of this. So, as I said, from most integrated to the least integrated. Spirit, the culture of why did Indonesia or why did ASEAN succeed where we were not able to do in coming together? In a sense, the Southeast Asian nations have one cultural trait which is common to all of them. They call it Berkampung, the spirit of togetherness. It's somehow, that is a cultural factor which drives the psychology and makes it more amenable. They also have political differences and divisions, but they were able to overcome that. In the case of South Asia, I think that partition syndrome that we evolved held us hostage so insidiously that we have not been able to break those prisons which we constructed in our own mind. I mean, the prisons, the walls that we constructed in the mind are far more difficult to demolish than the concrete walls that we built outside. Secondly, I think one of the principal reasons, and here I think we need to do some pondering over it. Indonesia, at that point of time when ASEAN was floated, it still is geographically the largest entity, but it was also the most powerful in terms of the size of the army and political power, political weight, etc. It was, I would say, statesmanship on the part of Adam Malik and his president went along to step back, to give space to the smaller entities to come forward and say, grow. And that is how it happened. The others needed to, and I've stated that in a recent article I published, that the idea of India's huge size, influence, might in terms of politics or military or economics, it dwarfs everyone else. It's larger than the combined size of all the others. And in a sense, this drives the psychology both ways. It drives the psychology of the smaller states looking at India and not being sure, how far they can go, and of the other states saying, these are small people, I can deal with them. They better fall in line. This is the perception. He mentioned the word perception. Sometimes, and in my experience, and particularly when I have been dealing with Indo-Bangladesh relations, I've been dealing for a long time, but in the recent times, the perception far outstrips the importance of the substance. Whatever substance we put on the ground, it has to be perceived, because we are all democracies in different stages of imperfection. Okay, some are more imperfect than others. Now, in the end, every 5 years, the voters go, the leaders go to the voters asking for the vote. They keep that in mind. Whether the voters have the freedom to vote or not is a different matter, but they always keep that in mind. And the voters similarly think that that is the power they hold. It may be illusory, but it is a power they have. Shall I stop here?
Can I ask Dr. Raghavan now to put this?
Thank you. And let me begin by congratulating Brookings for initiating this excellent program. Something I think is a multifaceted sort of reflection of relationships. In Nepal, when I was trying to find a Sanskrit word for connectivity, I came up with Sannikarta, which is much more complex than Sambandha, but this is a Sambandh about Sambandha, so this is it's wonderful. As a Nepali, I look at connectivity through the pain and burden of landlords. Right? This is really the entry point. It's the defining narrative. And And the facts speak for themselves. There are about 40 countries, landlocked countries in the world, with more than a population of 250,000,000. Almost all of them are poor, with a few exceptions. What are the exceptions? They are not technically landlocked. So you have 6 very rich European countries, which on a map look like landlocked, but they have access to navigable rivers, and they're sitting right there in the middle of the world's largest common market. So the whole channel through which landlockedness is punitive doesn't apply to them. Then you have around a dozen countries who are exceptionally rich in natural resources. So the Stans, for example, or Botswana sitting on a huge diamond mine, it sort of negates. Now you ignore these exceptions, the other landlocked countries in sub-Saharan Africa and in Asia, Afghanistan, Nepal are the 2 poorest countries on the continent. Laos is the poorest country in Southeast Asia. Mongolia, again, they've discovered gold and other stuff, which is helping them negate this. So there's a structural reason why landlocked countries are poor, stay poor, and all that. So connectivity becomes exceptionally important because it reduces the costs, it reduces distance, and we've known since the time of Adam Smith that your route to wealth creation is a function of productivity that emanates from specialization. Specialization is dependent on division of labor, and division of labor is determined by the extent of the market. Right? So anything that we can do to enlarge the size of the market, specialize, engage it. So that's the theoretical basis through which we look at this issue of connectivity. And this is where I think exploring all the multiple facets of connectivity is exceptionally important. And this is where I see the new value addition that your initiative will bring is traditionally we focus too much on transport connectivity. So road or rail maybe, and then we broaden that to aviation connectivity, again, very important for landlocked countries. In recent years, we've been talking about water, inland waterways, and all that. Now from transport to infrastructure, we've now given it a more economic shape as well. We've started to talk about digital connectivity, energy connectivity, and all that. Now you really broaden that, right? So I was looking at your catalog of indicators at the back, and it's pulling together all these diverse indicators and identifying the dimensions, so economic, environmental, political, security, social, cultural. I think it would go a long way in adding a lot of value and enriching the sense of discussions. But there are going to be you have to be careful, right? So there's a whole science to how you do these composite indices. There needs to be a nice theoretical framework. What kind of variables you judge to be relevant is exceptionally important. How you go about collecting data, how you impute missing data, how you do normalizations. There are different units through which you measure these things. How you weight them, how you aggregate them, how you do the sensitivity analysis, robustness. So all that is exceptionally important. And sometimes we get excited with this deluge of data, and then we put everything together, come up with a composite indicator, and sometimes it actually misleads. So the doing business is a classic example where standing on their own, the 10 indicators are very useful for that kind of sectoral reform, but when you put it together, it ends up giving a very misleading picture. In Nepal, we jumped 16 steps this year on very minor tweaking of a very minor subcomponent. Right? And we look at Bangladesh, the most dynamic economy in the region right now, which ranks 168th. So I think how we use this deluge of data and indicators and variables will be very important. There's something on the theoretical content of this as well, where we probably need to be clear on. If you look at the economic dimension, I think that's more reciprocal in nature. Right? Once you normalize by the size of your economy, by the population headcount and all that, you can say that okay, this is a dimension where there's a win-win outcome that can be strived for. Environmental is where actually there's a global or a regional public good element which transcends bilateral or even sub-regional relationships. Now on political, it's more unilateral in nature, political and security. Smaller countries will be less interested in this than larger aspiring powers. And social cultural is probably both reciprocal in nature as well as maybe there's a public good dimension. So I think you really need to unpack which is reciprocal, which is interesting from a reciprocal perspective, which is more of a unilateral thing for an aspiring power like India, and which actually have global and regional public good characteristics. So that would be very, very important. On data too, again, you really need to normalize. You have to acknowledge the asymmetric presence of India. 85% of South Asia is India, right? So how 600,000 people in Bhutan or 30 million people in Nepal. Sometimes, yes, in international relations, there's sovereign reciprocity, sovereign equality, and all that. But a lot of the economic fundamentals get driven by the size of the market and all that. So that needs to be accounted for. And in economics, we are obsessed with gravity equations. We control for all these things, and then make an analysis. So I think those disciplines need to be brought in to this exercise as well. When you benchmark South Asia with Southeast Asia, with the European Union, with Mercosur, with Southern Africa, those comparisons need to come to the fore, because we often have a very misleading metric, right? We keep on saying, oh, intra-regional trade in South Asia is 5%. I've been hearing this number, people probably cuts, it's like, and I did a back of the envelope exercise. Let's assume that tomorrow, miraculously, we double exports from all the neighboring countries to India, double, 100% growth, right? And you probably go from 5% to maybe 7.5%, 8%. So I think these things have to be really taken into account. So the conceptual, the holistic, the interdisciplinary focus that you are trying to do is absolutely welcome. But let the dimensions stand on their own. So don't be tempted to really put this all together and come up with this, one single number that is supposed to connote something, and so that would be very important. On the policy applicability, so the holistic interdisciplinary aspects, the data aspects, and on policy applicability, you've very boldly stated that the perspective is Indian. And I think that's gonna attract a lot of flack. And I would suggest that you don't need to state that. Right? 85% of South Asia is India. Anything once the numbers dictate priorities, it's gonna be.
These days.
But I'm warning you for the Kathmandu audience, for example. I think let these be. India is a rising power. It's a leader by default, and these things will follow their own course. And a lot of the things that you suggested we do, neighbourhood studies, capacity building, and all that is very, very welcome. I liked your diagnosis of the drivers. Yes, once China came to the fore, I think a lot of the other powers have taken notice. Not just India, but the United States, for example. Something very interesting is playing out in Nepal right now. The growth imperative, again, for us, that's the fundamental motivation. And the cultural things is always nice. The exercise of soft power, high relation, and all that is always important. And the other thing that I really liked in your paper is on the way you've articulated and often substantiated with facts. This momentum is something new, something fresh, right? And leadership matters, right? So leadership matters when they really make these overtures. Prime Minister Modi's visit to Nepal in 2014 really took Nepal-India relations to a new height. It melted 2 decades of distrust and all that. And then he screwed it up again with the blockade. So leadership matters, choices matter. And to give him credit, he's tried to now undo the damage without speaking the word and referring to that nasty episode. The infrastructure that really results in lowering of costs and the financing instruments that are being offered. Again, post-earthquake reconstruction, for example, a lot of the border-related infrastructure, the nudge that he has put in place for the bordering states to invest and connect with neighboring countries. I think all that is very important. and these hard infrastructure, the financing on offer, being lubricated by a change in mindset. I think that's also been noticed, and that's very important. Recent Indian ambassadors, for example, the priorities one can see have been very, very different. And then this openness to leverage already existing institutions, like subnational institutions, regional institutions, multilateral institutions. I mean, the needs are so huge in countries like Nepal. We have $1,000 per capita. I mean, the infrastructure deficit is massive. India will never be able to fill that void. India, will never be able to substitute, the chronic needs that neighbors have. This is where I think, despite early Indian reservations, every country in South Asia signed up to the BRI enthusiastically, with the exception of Bhutan, as you mentioned, but Bhutan is a special case. So, but then, as Sam Saran pointed out at a recent meeting of ORF on Silk Road diplomacy, a lot of the infrastructure that's been funded with Chinese money, with American money, the largest beneficiary is India. We made such a hue and cry about Hambantota. I think Rohan might be able to say, but half the car exports of India are happening through Hambantota. So India is the largest beneficiary of all these projects. Because and I liked your article this morning. You quote Subramaniam. I think he's the father of the current foreign minister, who talks about let India chill, let it relax. You don't need to be paranoid, because the alignment, the geographic, cultural, linguistic, economic alignment are such that the neighbors, they will wake up and find out, that who your natural allies are, who your natural trading partners are. The linguistic bonds, the people-to-people ties, all that will prevail I wouldn't even say in the long term, it's in the medium term. So on the whole, I think it's an excellent initiative. I really welcome the data-centric, the rigorous approach that you've taken. But we should not dump the qualitative narrative, which is also often very compelling, and the numbers often don't capture. But let's pursue both in tandem, and let the numbers sort of enrich the more richer the qualitative discussions on connectivity.
Yeah, thank you, Dejupa. And at the very outset, let me thank my friend Tino and Team Brookings for inviting me here and giving me this opportunity to share some of my ideas as a researcher. I definitely appreciate your initiative and conception of this project Sambandh. In ORF, we have also taken initiative in the name of proximity to connectivity. The crux of the story is set. And we have started it long time back in 2014. And we have published several monographs. As a researcher, what I'm going to say in these next few minutes is my observations on these kind of connectivity projects. Because the prime question is, whose connectivity is it anyway? If we say connectivity, it doesn't confine within only building up roads, rail networks, or building up ports. It's also in relation to people's connectivity. How people perceive about these connectivity projects. Here comes the importance of what Rohan has talked about, and also what Ambassador has also specified regarding perception. When we visited Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, all the Southeast Asian nations up to Singapore, the main observation which came to our mind is the definition of perception. It's not monolithic. It's not confined within capital. It varies from place to place, from capital to periphery. So the question is, what kind of connectivity we are talking about? Is it a connectivity between one capital to another capital, or are we willing to engage core as well as peripheral units, which is very important when we visited Terai region as soon as we completed that difficult period. And the perception we got, it's surprising, which was supposed to be our safe cushion for Indian side. And then the people, they were so disgusted. So the position was so severe. It's important to understand what these common people perceive. I can tell you a small anecdote, because in ORF Kolkata we have taken initiative while doing these projects that perception is very important to understand. Why don't we start with India and China? So we have done media perception, and we found stereotypical, meta-narrative, nationalistic fervor of perception. But when we visited all the bordering states, starting from Arunachal Pradesh, Sikkim, the most important two states which share international border with China, we spoke to people, we had filled in questionnaire, we had survey, and the reactions that we got from local people, it's surprisingly different. So what the people feel, it is also very important, and the time has come to understand that particular perception of local people. So far as Nepal is concerned, when we visited Birganj, there were number of important colleges which once upon a time were, these colleges were under Calcutta University, then shifted to Patna University. And they intended to get in touch with these age-old universities. So you have to take it into account that the peripheral units are also very important to engage. Similarly, in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, when we visited, we talked to Trincomalee Port Authority, we talked to Colombo Port Authority. They are saying that we are very much eager to have cooperation with India. Colombo has different wings and they are expanding. So they are telling, you are a think tank, so why don't you place that policy and you place in front of your government. The government can invest for owning a particular terminal, as it has happened in case of China or in case of Japan. And also, as Swanning has mentioned, that it's not the negative picture that we are getting from Hambantota. So there are different kinds of perceptions that we have to take into account. This is number one. Number two, which is very important to understand, is legal implications. In any kind of cross-border activities, legal implications are very, very important. So we have to disseminate this kind of, information to local people as well. Again, I can share some of my, experiences while visiting Nepal. A group, they disclosed a kind of experience that they had while cross the border with bottles of liquor. And they didn't have that information that other side of the border, the government actually has by that time banned liquor. So as you all know that Bihar government has banned liquor. So because of that offense, they got caught red-handed and they went into jail. So these kind of small steps are very, very important along with the big budget project. Third example, and the third point that I want to highlight is regarding again legal implication of a specific part or aspect or segment of migration. We know that these borders are artificially created. There should be no doubt about it. And if it is so, and it is also very important to understand the the community-wise connectivity across border. We know that the best case of this soft border approach is FMR that we enjoy in India-Myanmar border. So it is important to understand the importance of border lands instead of border, because border, it will not connect us, it will actually divide us from our neighbor. And you know that neighbors, always come automatically in our life. We cannot choose our neighbors. So it is important to understand how to deal with these neighbors. And in case of migration, I would like to say a few words specifically in terms of trafficking. Because I am coming from Kolkata, which is a very important transit point for trafficking. And also the connectivity, if you build up roads, if you build up railway connectivity, it doesn't mean that only goods and good passengers will move in between. There will be criminals, they will be also using that kind of channels. So they have a very strong syndicate. And if you want to understand that kind of vulnerability, you have to understand with the straitjacket definition of citizenship. The victims, those who were trafficked, specifically from Bangladesh and Myanmar, staying in some of the brothels in Kolkata. We personally, our team personally spoke to them. First, it's a myth that they are always being trafficked. There is a sheer economic necessity. So my point of view is they have to be seen as worker, as laborer. So if it can be projected as a labor, then the next question will be how you are going to deal with this labor. So there should be a kind of legal understanding across border between India, Bangladesh, between India, Myanmar. I know India, Bangladesh, they are taking very initiative to deal with this situation. But even then the situation is so bad that those who are trafficked, process of repatriation is being taken. So the person who was affected, she has been repatriated, but the child, they are there in Kolkata. So what will be the fate of these newborn babies? So these kind of legal issues, I think, should be come up while we are dealing with the different facets of connectivity.
Thank you so much. I think one of the strands that we all heard basically from panelists about is about the perception. It was about what does connectivity is, how is it looked at. It's quite different from what New Delhi, what we sitting in New Delhi are looking at connectivity and what they are looking at, say in Dhaka, Colombo, and Kathmandu. Dr. Samarajiva, in fact, you referred to Shyam Saran's speech, which was also quoted in the paper. And if I may actually go back to it, and he talked about this creation of web of interdependencies. And he, in fact, talked about that these interdependencies should be created in such a way so that even if there are political changes, that they will not be disrupted. We have seen the Neighbourhood First policy for so many years, and we have talked about this phenomenal, and Ambassador Karim talked about this phenomenal creation of connectivities in the last decade. But also at the same time, I would also say that, I would argue that many of these things have happened because there have been friendly governments in many of these capitals. What happens when these friendly governments go away?
Well, what Ambassador Saran is saying is that if you have the interdependencies already built in, even if the friendly people go away, things will have to continue. It's to block that, to reduce the volatility that you build in the interdependencies. Now, what I find when I debate people about trade agreements and so on is that their opposition to the trade agreements is because it takes away discretion. So we are trying to get a low discretion situation. They want more discretion. So they want volatility. And people like us are saying less volatility. Then the question becomes, how good are the agreements? How good are the arrangements? So because everybody knows that once you put that electricity cable in, or once the port starts being dependent on Indian transshipment, that's a lock. You can't just remove it. But then they ask, how good were our negotiators? How good were the arrangements? How competent were the people who framed the legal agreements? And that's what they're worried about. That is, they're worried that asymmetry and unfairness and so on will be hardwired into the institutional arrangement. That's their concern. I mean, I don't agree with them. I say, yeah, put me as a negotiator, I'll negotiate for you. But
Basically, you have actually worked in this, I would call you perhaps the father of sub-regional cooperation in this area. Can you, basically you started the whole BBIN concept in so to say. How would you basically consider the state of BBIN right now? It had started with a lot of promise. It was considered as an alternative to SARC, which is right now completely horrible. Do you think it has fulfilled its promises that it had at one time?
I'd like to say that it has. Sadly, it has not yet done so. The regional aspect of the connectivity has not come out strongly in the perception of the people. What people in Bangladesh see is basically that, well, okay, India has got its transit and transshipment that it has wanted for so long. Where is the regional aspect? Where are our trucks and ships and boats going to Nepal or elsewhere? How does it go further? You see, we in Bangladesh, and I was part of that process in the mid-90s, when the T word was taboo. You use transit and people would just, if they see a red flag and flare up, okay? We use the word connectivity. We took the concept of the Trans-Asian Railroad and Highway project, which had been slumbering or sort of hibernating in the ESCAP, previously ECAFE, since the 50s. And we said, okay, if you want to realize that, then the smaller connectivity within the larger connectivity becomes a logical compulsion. You can't have a larger connectivity and exclude the smaller connectivity. That is so. It was during that time of Sheikh Hasina's first government that we started using the word connectivity more and more, and in the terms of regional connectivity. BBIN is not an alternative to SARC. It's spawned by SARC. It was the realization that SARC, the whole beast, is not moving forward. So our challenge was, can we make one leg and two legs move forward? Maybe the rest will follow. And in that, if you look at the whole region, you could say it's three sub-regions. There is, Bangladesh, India, Bhutan. Because India is the only country which has borders with everybody else, excepting Afghanistan, which has the dubious dissection of having a buffer in Pakistan. Okay. Now, in eastern sub-region is Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal. Southern is India, Sri Lanka, Maldives. Western is India. And back in those days, when it was first floated by Bangladesh in 95, 96, there was only India and Pakistan. Afghanistan joined later. The Western sub-region was the most difficult. So we said, okay, let's start with the perhaps the easiest sub-region. In the easiest sub-region, that could only happen if Bangladesh and India got its relations right. You have to have three sets of good, friendly, strong relations, bilateral relations, before you can think of beyond bilateralism. And so that was the overall strategy on which Bangladesh started, working. And it so happened that the governments were in agreement, the leaders were in sync in their vision, and without the leaders actually giving that visionary mandate to their bureaucracy and negotiators, it would not have happened. Okay, because I mentioned the first time, it's always politics that has held us back from doing things which are larger than life for us. Unfortunately, BBIN is still an intergovernmental process. SARC was institutional, it was institutionalized, but it hasn't gone anywhere. BIMSTEC was also set up in 97, it is institutional, but it also slumbered for 20 years. BBIN actually, through the intergovernmental process, was actually making progress until the government stopped consulting. So for over 3 years, perhaps longer, the joint working groups did not meet, they did not take ideas forward, they had agreed on a broad framework, but then Nothing happened. And part of it, I would say, is the haste to jump to BIMSTEC. Okay, let's operationalize BIMSTEC because India is very keen that its Act East policy must happen. I would humbly submit here that BIMSTEC in the 7-nation BIMSTEC, who are 4 countries, BBIN. Now, if you can't make BBIN successful in any of the ventures it has undertaken, why should the other 3 countries have any interest in going forward on that? Okay, the success of BIMSTEC will depend in direct proportion to the success that BBIN can demonstrate. If you put 1 or 2 examples of compelling success, immediately it will excite attention, and who knows, it might even wake up slumbering Pakistan. But I don't worry about that.
Can you give an example of what kind of success?
Well, the motor vehicles agreement. It happened because the SAARC summit in 2014 in Kathmandu failed. They could not arrive at the motor vehicles. It had been, I was High Commissioner here, the draft had been agreed by the senior officials, and I said, have the ministers signed off? 1 minister was missing. Even the energy cooperation agreement, the framework agreed upon by the secretaries, ministers missing. So I had my lingering suspicions that unless the ministers come together in Kathmandu, it's not going to happen. It did not. Now, talks about sub-regional cooperation between Bangladesh and its immediate neighbours had been happening informally. I think at that point it came and gelled together and said, okay, if SAARC is not going to do it, we'll just take that draft and call it BBIN MVA. And so, I think it was in January 2015 that they agreed.
15 June.
In 15 June it was signed, but in January the senior officials agreed to it. Then they met in May or June in Thimphu, and it was signed there. Now, having signed it, trial runs were operated, you know about it. The trial runs between India and Bangladesh and Nepal were and the SOPs have been agreed upon. But then, if all the 4 countries don't ratify it, it cannot be operationalized. Bhutan only half ratified it, which held it in suspended animation for the last so many years. Now I think we are coming to a point where 3 countries are saying, we have done everything. Let's start going. Bhutan can join when it will. So I hope it will happen now. The meeting has taken place after 2 years of suspension. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed. If that happens, it's already been identified that we will then try and replicate to the extent possible a similar railway framework and a similar waterway framework. Okay? So, and you made the point, Swarnim, that Nepal is landlocked. Well, in that sense, Bangladesh is India-locked. Okay? But what we all forget is this landlocked, India-locked thing, this narrative is only 72 years old. You have a narrative of several millennia where we were water-linked. The British, you look at the example, the template they left behind in 47. All the rivers were connected. They built the railroads in the late 1800s. They interconnected them as a circulatory system of the human body. The roads in this part of the world, the roads are the most difficult to construct and maintain because of the nature of the soil. They wash away after 4 months or 6 months. So they focused on that. And for bulk transportation, the waterways are superb. And basically they had constructed, now we also cut off coastal shipping. Many of the ports were connected from South Asia, Orissa, with Bengal and onward. So that wasn't there until 2015. We cut off merchant shipping. That wasn't there until 2015. Okay. Now we have connected, we have additional forms and alternatives. So water connectivity becomes of supreme importance. And what did the British do? They had the Bengal presidency, the richest presidency of the 3 presidencies they had in India. It contributed more than 30% of the total colonial revenues. Okay. Bengal had the highest GDP. It also had the highest per capita GDP, I'm told. Now, what made it rich? It was that integrated economy and the integrated ecological structure which put people together. And then when this was disrupted, everything fell apart. Okay. So now I'm hoping, now it's also beyond that. You have to have the soft connectivity also. And why has Bangladesh suddenly surged so recently, jumping up from 5.5 or 6% to 8%? It's because we have power trade happening now. And we are going beyond bilateral. It's not just India. Now we have power trade with Nepal. We were negotiating power trade with Bhutan. It fell through because of certain administrative actions that India took, which held it hostage for 2 years. India realized the wisdom of reviving it, so it's again hopefully to take off. You know, in this region, if you take hydropower alone, between Northeast India, Nepal, and Bhutan, there is enough hydropower to meet all our requirements for not just the immediate, for the next several decades. Okay, so we can wean away from the thermal power that we are generating, reduce our carbon footprint at the same time, and do lots of things. Our industrialization took a big spurt in the last 10 years because the government was able to ensure energy availability. And so, if we can fulfill this, and then digital connectivity is very, very important. If you are going to have connectivity, and you stick to the 19th century, early 20th century rules of clearing of vessels and persons, you're going to have a 100-mile long tailback. So you have to do that. That hopefully will also happen.
If I may jump from here to Anusia, since Ambassador Karim talked about waterways being the supreme connectivity, and you have worked a lot on the India-Bangladesh waterways issue, and which has basically taken off, I would say, last year. And they have, I believe, in November they started the pilot project. If you can give an overview of where it stands and what are the challenges that has emerged from it, and what are the lessons that we can learn from that, because that has been an extremely important issue for both the countries, and that has perhaps could be seen as a beacon of being a model of connectivity in the region.
Yeah, thank you, Vidduka, for highlighting this important project. Apparently it is a very success story, but if you go deeper to understand the current situation, I am still not very optimistic, because when we started, doing this research, what we wanted to pursue is, first we wanted to interact with the stakeholders to understand what is the current situation. We visited some ship owners associations and talked to them, obviously located in Kolkata. They are saying what we are getting out of it, nothing. Then we started the question why. Then they said it's mostly dominated by Bangladeshi vessels. Then we asked them why it's dominated by Bangladeshi vessels. They started saying precisely for two reasons. One is diesel is subsidized there, so they are getting easy, fuel for running these vessels. But the second point is even more interesting, is when the vessel coming from Bangladesh to Kolkata, it is coming empty, which means we are not getting any product or any commodity from Bangladesh. So it's coming empty, but going back to Bangladesh with fly ash, which is helping them to boost their cement industry or brick industry, which is very, very interesting. This is the interesting part of the story. So, which is directly linked us to the trade regime across border, and how we place certain commodities in positive list and how we are placing many numbers of commodities in negative list. I am not economist, but as a student of political economy and international relations, I can understand that the crux problem of our market orientation. So if we have these kind of orientation or mindset in our mind, in the name of protectionism, then probably the union that you were talking about, or the hub we are desiring or thinking of, it will not come up in recent future. So we have to make it a point, because when we visited Bangladesh, just to understand this, the urgency of this particular point, then we came to know till 2006, jute was being traded from Bangladesh to Kolkata via inland waterways. But after 2002, it stopped. So the demand, we have to know what is the demand. So, reformation or re-establishing or establishing new roads, new rail networks, or the other kind of communication networks is not enough. We have to understand where the demand lies and what are the products can be traded. We have to relax that number of lists. This is one aspect. The second is difficulty in terms of navigability. The because of siltation, the depth of river is very low. So it's not congenial for the vessels. So in this particular point, I think India and Bangladesh have come very close to each other, and they have decided the burden sharing in the mode of 80-20 percentage. So 80% India is giving, and 20% is coming from Bangladesh. So indeed, this way they have started their war, but it's a long process. Then again, third important point is all round year-wise navigability and night navigability. So these are the very, very crucial problem. But though you are right that Indian Agency of Inland Waterways, they have taken a very important step to include Nepal's rivers like Kosi, Ghargara, Gandak into the purview of India-Bangladesh Protocol route, which conceptualized in 1972, long way back. So now Indian government is taking initiative to open up a new route. Initially, India-Bangladesh Protocol route was named as National Waterway 2, which runs through precisely the northeastern provinces. Okay, so and it's very interesting. This is basically for the benefit of northeastern states, because it's going through Bangladesh to northeast. And utilizing these kind of facility, we have traded rice from East Coast, right, from Andhra to Ashuganj, and from Ashuganj to Tripura. So it has proven as a success story. So it is very, very important in terms of inland waterways. Now Indian government is taking initiative to open up another route, which is National Waterway 2. And this is between Varanasi to Haldia, and it will also include Kosi, Ghargara, Gandak into the main purview. But definitely it will face the same kind of situation because of the nature of rivers. We have to understand that. So, and the dredging is very, very expensive. So how to cope up with these constraints?
Can we get I want to have a China factor question here. Because one of the things that we always talked about when we talk about Indian aid to foreign countries is that it is demand driven, that it is not non-prescriptive. You have worked, you were there in the planning session when Nepal was negotiating the BRI, how to join the BRI. I would like to understand some of the insights that you got from your negotiations with the Chinese officials on how much flexibility and give and take is there, and how do you compare it with the Indian approach to it?
That's a big question, but let me.
You know the answer.
No, remember the Chinese offer came again in the painful aftermath of the blockade. Right? So Nepal was desperately looking for that psychological outlet. And physically, economically, the distance from Virganj to Kolkata is less than 1,500 kilometers, right, people? From Nepal to the nearest Chinese port is probably 5,000 kilometers, and you have to pass through Tibet. Anyone who has flown to, and the nearest economic cluster that we have in China is 4 hours of flight away from Kathmandu. So, the numbers are really, really adverse. Yet, we just needed that psychological availability of an option, right? You mentioned India locked, we are truly India locked on 3 sides, and on the north, So, it was against that, that background that the Chinese offer came. And initially, the popular understanding was, oh, Chinese BRI is equal to railways, right? And the popular imagination was captured by that. But we in government didn't have that luxury of a simplistic interpretation. So we dug deep, we looked into everything, we unpacked BRI. The stated constituents of BRI, there are 5 components, right? So physical infrastructure, that's the only bit that 90% of the people talk about. Then, ominously, next to physical infrastructure is policy harmonization. What does that mean? Right? Then there's trade, investment, and monetary arrangements. Okay, trade and investment, we know a lot. Monetary arrangements, banking cooperation, currency alignment, these are big issues. And then there's people-to-people ties, which is kind of harmless, right? People love junkets, they want to travel, and that's the easiest bit. So we did that. We looked at the constituents very carefully, and as long as it was physical infrastructure and the financing terms that was in our interest, affordable, viable, and all that, I think that was a no-brainer. But as I said, once we looked into the details, other issues came. One issue there was the issue of, again, reciprocity. We're an LDC. We've been fighting for the last 50 years to safeguard the the principle of non-reciprocity as should be applicable to the LDCs. The Chinese didn't understand that because they are a late entrant to the international system, receiving assistance to fill this growing infrastructure gap so that we can spur our economic growth and engage in the process of catch-up.
And India can't obviously fill that.
India can't fill that because the needs are so big. I mean, your finance minister announced aid package. It's been reduced from 12 Arab to 8 Arab, right? Just the other day. And part of the reason was we were unable to spend what has already been allocated. But we're probably going to talk about this tomorrow.
I've been told that basically it has been decreased because 90% of the housing project has been finished. So
that is also probably true. And Dr. Pokhrel is here, the former vice chairman and the former CEO of the Reconstruction Authority. We'll probably get into this tomorrow. But the needs we were quantified is around 15% of GDP, being the infrastructure gap, just to keep up with growing demand. Forget the unmet needs and all that, and the growth spurring infrastructure, the inevitability of capital formation at low stages of development, blah blah blah. Right? We're ignoring just to meet growing demand, the population, the urbanization that's going on. It's 12 to 15% of GDP. So that's a massive gap. And of course, we welcome any Indian assistance. Grant is preferred to loans, but even concessional loans, but also private financing in areas where, so airports, the toll roads, the expressways. I think there's a lot.
I'm sure you must be understanding why would China invest a lot of money to have such a project, for example, like a Trans-Himalayan railway project. That is, I mean, if you're investing that much of capital, that is just for basically, moving people or moving goods between Nepal and China. It has to have a larger strategic objective, right?
Yeah. Now on the railway, I mean, the Nepali leadership, current leadership, the current ruling party, had really presented that as the big gift, as the that it would deliver to the people. And so, Kerum, the border town to Kathmandu railway, was promised in 2 years. Right? The Chinese, as we all know, are much more realistic about these things. And they played it down. Right? They've seen how difficult it has been to extend the existing train, the Qinghai Tibet railway, extend that to Shigatse and then Kerum. So it has to be part of the larger scheme, and for which India is actually, has to be on board. So Xi Jinping, when he visited Nepal a few months ago, he actually completely downgraded again, to save face of the Nepali rulers. They've been touting BRI equals train, and Kathmandu is going to see a train from the north in 2 years, just to save the face of people who advocated that nonsense. He said, okay, we'll keep doing the feasibility studies, but he emphasized, he pivoted the narrative towards distance reduction through roadways, which is much more viable, and he talked about tunnel technology, right? So shortening the distance from Kathmandu to the Tibetan border by 30 kilometers or so through new tunnel technology. That was the big emphasis.
Tino, I was going to ask you about BIMSTEC, but suddenly, since Dr. Wagner talked about the budget, I want to ask you also about the budget which was just presented recently on February 1st. You must have seen the numbers, the aid numbers, and that the South Asian proportion in the foreign aid budget has been going down. What is the inference that we should take from these numbers? Do they reflect priorities, or they just basically bureaucratic accounting?
So I'll give you a very short answer.
Yeah, so we'll have
in exchange, for other people to speak to come farther away. But I think very shortly, you know this, you've seen this. This capacity gap is apparent, is obvious, and India will never be able to match it. Compared to the Chinese model, the public sector companies in China, which are deeply endowed with capabilities to deliver and have the mechanisms right. And I'll be very frank, if India has an infrastructure problem within its borders, like look at the northeast, what is the capacity of delivering in northern Myanmar, in Nepal, in Bangladesh? It's good for public companies, right? We see some good developments. National Highway Authority of India has been now investing in thinking and investing in neighboring countries. But if you haven't been able to build the Kaladan project in Myanmar, the trilateral highway which Jaswant Singh inaugurated in 2002, 18 years later, right, we still don't have a working highway between Northeast India and Bangkok. We've been talking about it. It shows up in every statement, right? My issue is not it can't be done. I think we have to revisit the ways it's being done, and their private financing is key. And private financing from India and in partnership with many other countries which have, I would have to say, I mean, I'm not an economist, but what's called stagnant capital, right, with negative interest rates, for example, in Europe. And you see that, as I mentioned in that slide, you have a lot of financial institutions who are very keen in spurring this. But the ultimate need is what Ambassador Ikram was saying, political leadership, right? You will have to signal to lenders around the world that you're willing to invest in infrastructure domestically. That's a debate which many economists in the room of the domestic economy are shaping, and hopefully they will prevail. But there's an attached Indian economic debate which transcends towards the region. If you want to spur economic growth, you have to invest in infrastructure, you have to borrow, you have to invest, and therefore also with a certain strategic logic, which the Japanese have been doing for the last 30 years. That's the ADB is about that. If you look at any Japanese company, they're thinking about investing, has a strategic, including geopolitical logic to it. India will have to embrace that same logic in Nepal, in Bangladesh, in Myanmar.
Since we have very limited time, I think we should go directly to questions from the audience, and we will take three, 4 questions at one time. First, the gentleman here. And can we introduce yourself?
My name is K. Subramaniam. I was in the Government of India Home Ministry for many years, particularly on research and policy side. What I want to know is why, I mean, it's an extraordinarily deep and profound discussion so far, but still more discussion is needed. Because what I find is that, for example, I find myself in great sympathy with the points made from my friend here in Northeast India. I served in the Northeast for many years. I can tell you that every Northeastern state has produced a human development report. It's something very extraordinarily important in the Indian context because development is lagging. So many problems are there. But I wonder, the Mehboob Haq Center for Human Development in South Asia has produced a number of important reports which need, reconnection with South Asia, because I think we need to take into account all the studies prepared by South Asia Human Development Index, prepared by the Mehboob Haq Center for Development. So we need to discuss these things in a way. And then, again, when you talk about reconnecting crime and criminality, the entire region is spreading because of reconnectivity which is taking place all over. Multinational systemic crimes are emerging, the emergence of people from Bangladesh ladies, women from Bangladesh being trafficked
So
to
let me ask you
Calcutta
to
and
ask
so
the
on.
question.
So the basic question is we need to look at a more comprehensive discussion is required. Thank you very much.
I think second question.
Sorry, I can speak without your mic. I'm a professor of international studies from the Academy of International Studies, Jamia Millia Islamia. Now, one thing, we need to take a comparative view of this connectivity issue. I think the disintegration of the Soviet Union, today Russia is actually welcoming, I'm being very brief, Chinese investment in all the Central Asian republics because China is helping to build infrastructure there which Russia thinks they will benefit from. And so it's not a one-off thing, it's not a zero-sum game. Somebody comes in and builds an infrastructure. What is it going to be used for? Let's ask a very simple question. Who is going to use it in the next 10 years, next 15 years? Only China? Nobody else? So can you have a view of building a global infrastructure? Apparently not. You have to have a global view of who's going to use that infrastructure. That's number one. Number two, on this issue, because while we're about it, I visited all the three countries. 2 months in Dhaka, 2.5 months in Kathmandu, some time in Colombo. Now you see, the other thing is that present government, whatever else you might have, you are trying to promote religious tourism. Prime Minister Modi's visit to Nepal, they reconstructed the entire Sita Ki Rasoi route from Kathmandu to Ayodhya. And the Supreme Court judgment on Ayodhya has given 5 acres of land to the Sunni Waqf Board to build a new mosque there to replace the Babri Masjid mosque. So, and today, this year, 18 lakh Muslims are going on Hajj under the present government dispensation. I'm just saying that religious tourism has to be taken, it's been completely missed out, I'm sorry. And with Sri Lanka also, Prime Minister Modi specifically opening new air routes from, I come from Banaras, I know, from neighboring, Sarnath. So religious tourism.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I really don't know, people challenging from cuts, I really don't know from where to start because collectively we have almost about 40 years of experience on working on many of these issues, including advocating for and introducing competition policy and law in many of these countries and various other connectivity initiatives. So therefore, let me start on a lighter note. I'll be very, very brief. Ambassador Karim, you said that you took the ASEAN example, right? I mean, they are relatively successful as compared to SARC or BSTEC or BBIN. Perhaps their leaders know how to play golf. Our leaders don't know how to play golf. So we have to find out a game, not pass up, because that will lead to enclaves.
Our military leaders knew how to play golf.
They don't know, I mean, what game to play. I mean, that is one of the, therefore, that brings me to Tino's presentation. Tino, congratulations. I mean, you have identified a number of initiatives which are good, but there are many more which you need to go deeper. I mean, you can't do these things by sitting in Delhi. You have to spend time, for example, in Balar. I would suggest you go and spend about a week in Balar, in Meghalaya-Bangladesh border, and see how border huts are operating. Wonderful initiatives, and people of India and Bangladesh, both sides, very marginal people, they are very, very happy. How India-Bangladesh coastal shipping agreement is operating. Yeah. So you have to go to Chittagong, you have to go to Mongla, and you have to go to interior parts of Sundarban to see that through such people-centered, that brings me to what Anushwa said. I mean, you have to have people-centric initiatives, and only then you can have cooperation. Yeah. Ambassador Karim rightly said that BIMSTEC cannot be successful unless we show results, positive results from BBIN. Let me take it a bit far. BBIN cannot be successful unless we have positive results from India-Bangladesh bilateral cooperation. So border hack is one example. There are many other examples which I can talk about for hours. But let me end by posing two questions for you, because I think you are in a position to answer them. One is that India-Bangladesh relation, why it is taking so much of time to revive the old Mymensingh road? You are from that area, right? Shillong in 1948, Shillong was the richest city in India, right? Look at what it is now. Shillong, not Delhi, not Mumbai, not Calcutta, nobody. And secondly, why it is taking so much of time to revive the Chittagong-Dibrugarh road? I will urge you to look into that, including reviving the old link between Ganges and Brahmaputra via Rajshahi, via Sirajganj, via Daikwa, right? By breaking Jangipur lock, perhaps dismantling Farakka. So these are the things. So I would end on a slightly lighter note, maybe on a serious note, I don't know. Things in Bangladesh can work if we can show whatever initiative that is going to help either Gopalganj or Noakhali or both. This Rajshahi thing is going to help Gopalganj, Sheikh Hasina's place. Chittagong, Dibrugarh railway line, which used to be there, used to help Noakhali, Obaidul Qadir's place. So you have to keep those things in mind also. Thank you.
We can have one more question.
My name is General Mehta, and I'll make two brief comments and then the question. This is, I think, only yesterday, India has announced its second deep water port in Maharashtra. So your leverage that you were contemplating will go. I've just come back from Burma, and the reason, you see, the Northeast had a number of insurgencies which are still active. And one of the principal reasons that this connectivity is suffering and it's taking so long is because of the insurgency, although the government may claim a Bodo agreement or an NSCN agreement which is still out there in the air. It is still active and extremely active on the Burmese side. So the movement of the Arakan army has prevented moving the road network from the south Sittwe into Mizoram, and they are now working from the north to the south. So the road work has started. Now my question is to the diplomat on this panel. I mean, you said politics 6 times. Let me make it 7 times. If it is going to be politics, and the additional China factor, which wasn't there some time ago to the extent that it is today, how is this connectivity going to work? If governments change in Sri Lanka as they have now, and governments have changed in Nepal, and they are not necessarily as good or as favorable from India's perspective as India-Bangladesh relations, then how is this whole connectivity project going to move forward? Where your sub-regional things are also not working. One BBIN has become BIN.
I think we can, I think most of the questions are basically that we need to do more studies on connectivity, that this is such a vast subject and that we need more people-centric schemes. I would ask Ambassador Karim to take some of the questions that have been directed towards him, and then Dr. Sambandh.
Let me take the points people raised earlier. Why are some of these projects not moving? The connection, the road from Mymensingh to West Garo Hills, Nakugaon, Dalu. The decision was taken, the infrastructure is there, somehow it has not been connected. there were other issues involved because there were powerful elements who wanted other routes to happen. It's politics. Okay, it's the internal politics. When I refer to politics, it's not just the external, it's also the internal. And you have to remember something. There is the line of distinction between internal and external has become totally blurred. Each interacts on the other. And unless you understand this, you will have very simplistic approaches and solutions to it. They will not work.
I would like to touch on the point that Anuswa raised about the ship boats going full and coming back empty. This was also raised, you remember, in the meeting in Dhaka in which you attended. And I would suggest that at that point of time, we didn't have the coastal shipping agreement with the other countries. If you
Use the coastal shipping agreement as a feeder service, they can pick up cargo from other countries along the coast. You need to extend the length of the agreement. It's now Bangladesh, India, it's Myanmar, India. You need to draw in Myanmar, Thailand, and others. You will then find it's exactly the way the British used it. They were picking up, they were dropping along, but no ship was going empty either way. So we have to rediscover that. You mentioned about the state of the rivers and the non-navigability. You are very familiar. We didn't use the rivers for 60 years. These rivers carry billions of tons of silt and they keep depositing. When the routes were being used, it was the companies plying the ships which would do the maintenance dredging. If you stop it, it will keep accumulating. So now we have to get rid of 60 years of deposition in order. So we'll have to do it in stretches, and which I have recommended, and the World Bank is a partner in this, is that identify the stretches where the rivers cross the borders, where there are existing facilities, make that navigable so you do the connectivity, put up the infrastructure, upgrade it, and then when that happens, actually it will become a bottom-up process because those left out, the villages on either side, they will start demanding, what have we done? Why are you, not? So it will become an organic process which will grow. It will take time. It will take time because we cannot reclaim all the rivers. The damage done within, what we didn't do in 6 years will not happen in 6 years. You mentioned about the China factor. This is not a binary equation, sir. 5 years I was High Commissioner. Every year I went and addressed the NDC. Every year the question was asked, what about your relations with China? How is it going to affect? Our relations with India and our relations in China are on two parallel tracks. Our relations with India are not at the cost of China, nor are our relations with China at the cost of our relations with India. The two we can actually make them meet. We need infrastructure for our own good. Because we can mint money out of it, okay? You don't have an infrastructure and invest money and nobody uses it. We would like India to invest. India can to a certain extent, but the amount needed is huge. India's dreams are met short by the emptiness of its pocket. It cannot meet the capacity. It's the fact of life. So I have been telling and we are still telling India. The Chinese are ready, they come with money, they come with the labor, they do something, they finish it in 2 years, 3 years, it goes. Who's going to use it? Only me and China, it doesn't make sense. The connectivity is across the country to both borders. So you use this same facility with the Chinese investment that they are doing. It has to be looked in that way. It should not be looked at as a zero-sum game, which is at the one country expense of the other. I think I covered the points.
Yeah. Well, basically ports are not just civil engineering projects. Ports, particularly transshipment ports, have something called network economies associated with them. They are attractive not because of the quality of the port, but because of the services that you get from it. So India has been trying several times, between Cochin and Kanyakumari, there are several new ports that just before elections, you have announcements about various ports being built and money being spent, and we are spending $100 in Colombo. Why are we spending $100 in Colombo? Why don't we keep it here? I mean, if you want to play that game, you're not doing connectivity. Connectivity means that you think of the region and you try to take them into your logistics chains. So that's really up to India. The proposal, the report that I was involved in writing in 2003, both India and I and Sri Lanka had the agreement that Colombo could be a hub for the southern region. Of course, Gujarat is a different region. It's a big country. It's a big economy. But if you think that other rhetoric of displacing Colombo, why are we giving this to these foreigners? Yeah, we got to go and sit on somebody's lap then. Then we become a transshipment port for India, for China, and then don't complain about the aircraft carrier parked 24 miles away from your border. That's what's going to happen. How do you prevent it from becoming that aircraft carrier? Incorporate it into your transportation and logistics system.
Can I ask also now Dr. Vahnu and Dr. Rajot to also give 1 minute as a conclusion to this thing, because we have time that is running out. So
Yes,
we have to
and I have to
finish
catch
this
my
question.
flight as well. Can I?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, taking cue from Ambassador Karim, you have reminded me about ADB's latest plan of action, in fact, which has been published in 2018. They have portrayed an integrated map of coastal shipping agreement. It's a fantastic map. In fact, when we visited Thailand had a proposal to have that kind of integrated coastal shipping from Thailand, cutting across Myanmar, Chittagong Port, Bangladesh, and the east coast of India. So the map actually portrays the entire integral part of that coastal shipping agreement. And what you have talked about is basically we are caught in between development and security conundrum. How much we have to open up Northeast, we are not pretty sure about that. We were not sure earlier days. Recently, we are not at all sure. So we have to make it sure how much we will open our northeastern states border, because we are enjoying free movement regime with Myanmar, which is a clear classic case of soft border management. But definitely it is increasing some kind of other issues as well. But definitely it has done keeping the fact in mind that border actually has divided communal ties. That's why 16 kilometers within each other territories across border, we don't need any kind of visa. And also for the road from Mizoram to Palewa and Palewa to Sitwe, there are basically 69 numbers of bridges. And out of these bridges, only one bridge has been taken care of by Myanmar. And the other responsibilities are held on Indian government. So there is still a negotiation going on, and we are enjoying our democratic process of decision making. So these are the real situations that we have to take into account. And a last point I would like to raise is it is important to engage local people. It is important to understand how local people perceive about that particular project. Because when the Asian Highway project was portrayed, I was in a meeting organized by NEA in Guwahati. And the stakeholders, they started raising these issues, what kind of benefit we are getting out of it. So we have to clearly disseminate this information, otherwise Northeast is very volatile region, which has faced a kind of anti-foreigners movement, very badly. So they categorically raise the point of it will be again a mechanism to engage outsider into our domain. So what will be the benefit? So these are the facts we have to keep in mind. Dr.
Yeah. Well, let me congratulate Brookings again and wish this project well. It's extremely important. Vipul and Pradeep have 40 years of experience in this area, but mostly on economic issues. I think the ambition here is much larger. to bring in the environmental bits, the political parts. I see here UN voting patterns. And these are interesting indicators to look at. And this repository of numbers and time series data will be very, very important. So anyway, I wish Tino and his team well at Brookings and to serve a good public good. But connectivity is not an end in itself, right? It's a means to something else. And this is where I think that larger policy reform agenda has to be informed by all this richness. And this is where I think, from a Nepali perspective, I'm interested in thinning our borders so that we can diversify and lower our cost of trade. I'm interested in investment and financial cooperation, the new instruments for shared production, relocation of industries to lagging regions and countries. This whole flying geese pattern hasn't really played out in South Asia. It has in East Asia, not yet here. This coordinated production paradigms, we really are a laggard in this area. We're in the 21st century, the agenda of digitalization and lowering the cost of participation in the global economy. That's extremely important. This exercise of soft power, I think, will continue to be very important. So tourism, academic exchange, and that number on student exchange, it's a big question that has to be answered. And finally, again, custodian of the Himalayan ecosystem, clean energy, emphasis on clean energy and management of regional commons. Right? So the Himalayas support, I think, 10 river systems, the livelihoods of 2 billion people. So everything that we do is extremely important. So it has to be green infrastructure. Earlier, we talked about the BRI. BRI is said to be covering 60% of the world population. So how you do BRI? What kind of projects you fund? Is it green? Is it clean? Is it environmentally friendly? Will have existential ramifications to this project.
And thank you so much. Thank you all the panelists for your time and your curiosity and thoughts. And we'll give the vote of thanks.
Very quickly, since we are running out of time, I'd like to extend a word of thanks to our esteemed panelists over here who've taken time out to come to Delhi and share their perspectives on connectivity and their side of the story, which is not very popular in Delhi. Thank you, Devi Rupa, for moderating the panel, and all of you for coming out in support of the Sambandh initiative. As we move forward, we look for further collaborations. We are coming out with 10 new policy briefs in the coming weeks, and we would really like your feedback on all of them as we move with the initiative forward. And lastly, thank you to the Brookings team for organizing this event and just being very supportive throughout it. Thanks. And lastly, if you haven't already done so, Tino's policy brief, our first Sambandh policy brief is outside. Please